Hi, Kate.
Hi.
I'm here with Kate Colby. I'm very excited to be sitting with you, Kate, to talk about a poem by Laynie Browne, somebody whose work we admire very much. And it's a sonnet, that responds to Bernadette Mayer, who wrote lots of sonnets and cared about sonnets. Maybe before we read the poem and get into it, you might want to comment on the sonnetness of Laynie Browne and Bernadette Mayer and that being part of their connection.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were both known for writing sonnets, and I believe Laynie's practice was inspired to a large degree by Bernadette's. So I think she's frequently communicating with Bernadette by way of her sonnets.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we might be slightly more focused on the sonnet as a form. This is not simply a sonnet practice that you can get from Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Shakespeare. This is a Bernadettean variation on sonnet. How would you characterize Bernadette's attitude toward the traditional sonnet?
Well, it's a loose form for her. She keeps it messy and fast-moving without, the rhyme scheme or the formal niceties of a traditional sonnet.
So that's really relevant to us in ModPo, because ModPo is full of poems that are responding to traditional forms. Here's one of them. This one's called Thermodynamic Sonnet for Bernadette. Would you mind reading it, and then we'll talk about it?
Yep. Interrupting the season isn't only sepia-burnt patches, and green is a memory you almost believe. A call about reality is coming from the sun, the thermodynamics of fire. Feet remember when permitted to move apart. There's a rehearsal right now for the removal of anything impervious, including the fear of remaining optimistic long enough to collect laundry. Clear, bare earth and empty paper to begin, and the weariness of to begin is not Antarctica, a measure of sound, given this blank. No, you can't talk yourself out. Instead, embrace the calamity of love.
There's a reference to Antarctica which might not make sense to people encountering this sonnet without knowing something more about a Bernadette poem. Would you tell us about that?
Sure. She has a quite well-known for Bernadette Mayer sonnet called The Way to Keep Going in Antarctica. And the first line is, "Be strong, Bernadette." And she's sort of talking herself through this existential dread. And to a great extent, I think this sonnet is talking to that sonnet.
And how so?
I think it's kind of updating the nature of the dread. In Bernadette Mayer's sonnet, we kind of get the sense that she's trudging through Antarctica alone in the snow, and having a kind of personal existential crisis. But here I feel like there's a more global element coming in, and a kind of climate.
Oh, global in the
crisis.
sense of, yes, Antarctica isn't just standing in as a fantasy spot, but the real Antarctica.
Yeah, well, is it the real Antarctica? Hard to say.
Antarctica in its current situation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yes, Antarctica is melting. Yeah. And in Mayer's poem, she chooses it as this isolated location where she can hear and be afraid of her own heart beating. Right. But here, yeah, it's hard to write a contemporary poem and refer to Antarctica and not have it suggest something dreadful.
Thus, thermodynamic.
Right.
Which we should probably spell out. So, having to do with heat, the dynamics of heat. Okay, but this was published in the Poetry Project newsletter. And when I read it, it was a Bernadette gathering of people writing about Bernadette. And when I read that, I found this poem. And that collection of poems for Bernadette was in response to her passing.
Yes.
So do you see anything elegiac about this?
Oh, absolutely.
Can we talk about that?
Yes. It ends with the calamity of love, and the loss of Bernadette Mayer that I think the poem is responding to, in addition to the loss of so much we hold dear about the planet Earth. Those things kind of become tangled in this poem.
Can we then interpret the phrase, this blank? First of all, whenever you see this in a poem, especially a poem that we like to talk about, it's inevitably a reference to this, the writing that we're reading. The blank will clearly refer to the loss.
Yes.
But can we do more with it, this blank?
Well, sure. This is the poet with the blank page or the blank screen composing in the moment.
Right.
And we also have this possibility of, the denuding of the planet Earth. And we also have the suggestion of the blankness of Antarctica that, inspired both Mayer's and poem and Laynie's response to it.
There are 4 or 5 senses of blank, and you've nailed them, as always, Kate. But maybe one more, which is when you get to the couplet at the end of a sonnet, especially if you're doing it this way, 3 quatrains in a sonnet and a couplet, you get to the line, a measure of sound. Measure, for people who live and breathe poetry, measure is like a unit, right? Or specifically a foot, a metrical foot measure, a measure of sound. So you're already ready for the fact that in order to get to the couplet, you have to stop and make a blank. There's a space between the stanzas.
Right.
Yeah. It's sad, right, this poem?
It is sad, but it's not despairing. It embraces the loss of the person and the planet and clings to it as calamity, but something generative at the same time.
Right. And in this sense, I think it respects the tradition of elegy. There aren't that many, there's not a huge overlap of elegies and sonnets. I'm sure there are plenty, but there's not an inherent connection between the elegy form and the sonnet. But let's just think about the elegy form. So as I understand it, back in the Renaissance, the elegy was, this is like college sophomore coming out. I haven't talked about this in a while. Step 1, I've lost this person, is sad. Step 2, or section 2, is this is what this person did in life. And section 3 is we're going to go on, we're going to do something productive as the result of this great person. Does this sonnet do any of those 3 things?
It does not. It sits with the loss.
Right.
But again, doesn't stew in it. It doesn't. It doesn't harp on it as a tragedy.
Yeah.
It just sits with it.
Yeah. And it also turns the topic a little bit toward, climate change or temperatures rising. But what about the meta-poetic quality at the end? I mean, that to me suggests maybe Laynie Browne is saying something generative can come from this great loss and this great poet, and that would, of course, be more sonnets.
That's right. And those 2 last lines, the you there, no, you can't talk yourself out. Instead, embrace the calamity of love. She's both addressing Bernadette Mayer, who in her poem, The Way to Keep Going in Antarctica, is trying to talk herself out of this anxiety, an existential dread. And Laynie Browne is, telling herself you can't talk yourself out of loss and grief. You have to embrace the fact of having loved and what can come of it.
Live with it, as you said earlier. Okay, let's conclude by playing a little game. Let's just each in turn just pick a phrase or even a word just to add to the close reading texture of the conversation. So since I just sprung that on you, I will start. Empty and empty paper to begin, and the weariness of to begin. So that's not standard idiomatic English there, the weariness of to begin. But earth and empty paper. Did I say empty and empty paper? Earth and empty paper to begin. This is a reference, as you were hinting at earlier, of composition, of, getting out a piece of paper and creating a sonnet out of it.
Right.
But earth gets added to that. So it is, composition isn't simply a matter of writing another sonnet. There is something about beginning again, starting over, the need for humans living on the planet to start over, etc. Okay, your turn.
I noticed that memory comes up in this poem. Green is a memory you almost believe, and feet remember when permitted to move apart. And that the idea of memory supports the elegy, but it also is a piece of the mourning for the planet.
I like that. All right, let's do one more round.
Okay.
Okay. The fear of remaining optimistic. I just really like that, first of all. Fears, like if I were just having an everyday conversation about whether I should be optimistic or pessimistic, fear wouldn't be associated with the optimism side of that, But I think that's very humane and genuine. And I don't know, in thinking about Bernadette Mayer, we each knew Bernadette Mayer also, optimism and pessimism don't seem to be relevant categories to the personality of Bernadette Mayer. She was so living in the day that was given to her.
She really was.
And so I just love that.
I found that line particularly poignant in this moment at which we are reading this poem on the cusp of a very important election. And, we've all been burned before, and the fear of remaining optimistic is something that I'm familiar with.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, well, as a kind of strategy for living through a situation. Yeah, I mean, the record should show that we're talking in October of 2024, and the presidential election in the United States is happening.
That's right.
Early in the next month. All right, your turn. You get the last one.
Let's see. There's a rehearsal right now for the removal of anything impervious. I love those lines. I don't entirely know what to make of them, but I feel it that we no longer in our moment have the option of remaining impervious. And that's sort of chimes with what you just said about Mayer's mode, which was very kind of not la-di-da, but in the moment, sort of tripping through life and the world and recording it as it happens. But we don't, that's a mode we don't see much anymore. And when we do, it's often considered irresponsible because, there's a lot at stake in our moment.
Yeah. That is a really good way to finish this conversation about Thermodynamic Sonnet for Bernadette by Laynie Browne. Thank you, Kate Colby.